In this vlog, we're going to be approaching the concept of money from a philosophical standpoint, both to understand the subjective and the objective dimensions of money. The first thing we'll focus on is money as an emotional object. It might be strange to think of money as an emotional object because we usually think of it as something distinct or separate from emotions. But in fact, there is no objective money without a subjective emotional valence attached to the object. In some sense, the value money has is a value that comes from subjectivity. On an individual level, this can obviously be experienced in many different ways, negative, positive, and neutral. It could be that you have an underlying unconscious fear of money, anger, frustration of money, if you think it's going to get in the way of your desires, if you think there is some morally wrong with money. On the other hand, you might have very positive, happy, excited emotions related to money because you might think it will give you access to some objects that you want, or it might give you access to some experiences that you want. The basic point is that money always is something situated in relationship to an emotional valence, and this can affect the course of your life. Whether you become a banker or whether you become an activist, even the type of banker or the type of activist you are is in some sense mediated by your emotional relationship to money. Now, although there is this irreducible emotional subjective dimension to money, the collectivity of our actions and the way in which we emotionally engage with money does function within a type of external capitalist reality which has an objectivity all of its own. You may say it's an emergent objective capitalist reality. Now, this reality is something that can either, again, bring a lot of negative or positive emotions depending on how you feel about this reality. The first thing to note about this reality is that it's universal and that it appears to subsume all socio-cultural activity independent of historical background or independent of the cultural background within which it's operating. Capital mediates all socio-cultural exchange and is increasingly mediating all socio-cultural exchange. Now, the result of this is that capital, in some sense, overdetermines or determines the way in which our societies function and the way in which we will live out our life in a very objective and universal sense, in the sense that you can't escape that fact. Now, there may be a pragmatic way or a middle pathway to deal with this balance between the subjective emotional level of money and the external objective level of money, the most famous of which was proposed by Adam Smith in his understanding of the invisible hand. For Adam Smith, capitalism was on the whole a positive thing as long as one could align one's self-interest with market interest. In other words, for Adam Smith, if you balance your own desire with the desires of the market in such a way that you're able to derive a monetary gain, then your own self-interested activity in terms of profit maximization would lead to the good of society as a whole, thus annihilating, in his view, any of the conflict between living an authentic subjective life and living in an objective capitalist reality. Now, the degree to which Adam Smith's analysis is an accurate representation of the way capitalism actually operates is questionable and even at this point totally incorrect if we think about the invisible hand as unconditionally leading to the benefit of all human beings and the planet. By this point, it seems quite obvious that although on the one hand capitalism does lead to material abundance and well-being, the likes of which we have, at least for some people, never experienced before. On the other hand, capitalism also leads to almost grotesque levels of inequality and leads to radical destabilizations of our ecological niches and also our traditional social environments. And so in that sense, operating on the axiom that if one just follows one's own self-interest in relationship to market interests, everything will be okay, is a little difficult to believe when one sees the chaotic and irrational nature of the market in itself. And thus, learning how to cope with this distance between self-interested activity and market activity is, in some sense, a wicked problem that seems beyond reconciliation. However, we'll approach that in part 2 of Money. I hope that this introduction gave you a sense of the emotional level of money, the subjective emotional level, and the objective external level of money, and some of the contradictions and paradoxes of mediating these two dimensions.